Hello, I'm Kathleen Andrews, and I'm here today with the two authors of Reaching Net Zero, What It Takes to Solve the Climate Crisis, a very important book published in 2020 by Elsevier. The two authors are Bill Fletcher and Craig Smith. William Fletcher retired as Senior Vice President of Rockwell International Corporation, responsible for corporate R&D and business planning. Most of his career involved business planning and international operations for large companies. His international experience includes an assignment in Saudi Arabia, planning the large Jubail development project on the Persian Gulf, and with additional expatriate assignments in Asia, Europe, Africa, and Canada. I also have with me today Craig Smith, who retired as president and chairman of DimJim H&M, a subsidiary of AECOM Technology Corporation, an international engineering and construction management firm. He began as an assistant professor of engineering at UCLA, where he was also the assistant director of the Nuclear Energy Laboratory. He has been broadly involved in the field of energy and power, responsible for design and construction management, tests, and research on most types of electrical engineering facilities. Today, I'm going to ask each of them questions in turn, and I'm going to start with you, Craig. Craig, could you tell us how this book developed? You're already a published author, having the second edition of Energy Management Principles, Application, Benefits, and Savings in 2016, and several other nonfiction and fiction books.
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you for having us. I wrote the first edition of Efficient Electricity Use in the year 1980, following the Arab oil embargo when fuel prices tripled. And I was very interested because at that point, energy demand just started remaining flat and people found ways to use energy more efficiently. And that trend continued for several decades, and I kind of monitored it in some publications, writing a chapter in a handbook and that sort of thing, until 2016, when I wrote the second edition of the book, trying to summarize all the changes that had occurred over the past several decades. And that led me to think about writing a book about global warming, because I thought that energy efficiency could be a very useful tool to slow down global warming.
So that book, the 2016 edition and the 1980 earlier version, you wrote on your own. How did you and Bill decide to work together on the global warming book?
First of all, I think I should point out that Craig is being modest. He has several books, including some nonfiction books that he's written and had published over the years. He's has quite a few books to his name. First of all, Craig and I, when we started out, we didn't know each other very well. We had met, but we met again at an event in my neighborhood to meet then candidate Harley Ruda, who was running for Congress. One of us asked the candidate what his #1 issue was, and he said global warming, which surprised us a little bit. But we didn't get a chance to ask a follow-up question, which is, what are you going to do about it? Craig and I had lunch after that meeting and discussed our common interests, and that led to some other discussions. We discussed global warming, which we were both concerned about, and he at one point said, let's write a book. And I said, I don't know how to do that. And he said, well, I do. That started a partnership that's been going on for about 3 years now, and a very successful one, and resulted in the book, Reaching Net Zero. I think one other thing is, people would ask, why are two 80-year-olds writing a book on global warming? We're not going to get our feet wet. But I think we both are very concerned, not only about the future of our planet, but our concern for children, grandchildren, and all the generations that will follow us. We think this is a very big issue and we're more than willing to put in the effort to write the book.
Thanks, Bill. That's a really fortuitous meeting for you and Craig to get together. And another question for you, Bill. So there's actually a lot of momentum going of people discussing how to stop global warming. But I'm wondering, but it's like, is it really possible to stop global warming and stop using fossil fuels? Is it possible to meet all the world's energy requirements using renewable energy, wind and energy, including solar and wind? Is that a really practical idea?
Well, we discussed this at length in the book, and it is definitely technically feasible to provide more than enough energy to supply all the world's needs using solar and wind. That's not hard to demonstrate. The big change in our minds is that over the last 30 years, the cost of electricity generated by solar and wind has come down dramatically and continues to fall thanks to technology improvements and just sheer economies of scale. As you produce more, you get to learn how to do it cheaper and cheaper. And so not only is it technically feasible to power the world with solar and with electricity from solar and wind, it is also economical and getting cheaper every day. Renewable energy is becoming the cheapest form of energy in most locations in the world today.
Yeah, we're really seeing those economies of scale. And then another question for you, Bill. So what does reaching net zero? I think people are seeing that renewable energy is getting less expensive, but can we what are the main goals for reaching net zero? And can we really meet that goals?
Well, reaching net zero, which is the title of the book, is really a situation where no more man-made greenhouse gases are emitted into the atmosphere. We have to stop the emission of greenhouse gases by the use of fossil fuels and other activities. Now, there will be some emissions that cannot be eliminated, and those emissions to reach net zero have to be offset by carbon sinks that will absorb and sequester mainly CO2. And obviously the biggest sinks in the world today are forests, especially our rainforests in Brazil, Indonesia, and parts of Africa. The Earth's temperature has already risen about 1.1 degrees centigrade. That's 2 degrees Fahrenheit. And at the rate we're going, we could easily see the Earth's temperature exceeding 3 degrees C by the turn of the century. To limit the global warming to 1.5 degrees centigrade, and I'll come back to why, we would have to get to net zero by 2050. This is a very aggressive schedule. The objectives for global warming were set by the International Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, and their goal is to keep global warming under 2 degrees centigrade and try to keep it under 1.5 degrees centigrade. The Paris Agreement that was signed in 2015 has these goals written in. Unfortunately, it's our opinion that we can't meet these goals based on the time that it would take to get there. We can reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but we can't change that fast enough to meet the 2 degrees centigrade goal set by the IPCC.
Thanks, Bill. That's really stern stuff to have this target of 2050, and there's a lot of work we need to do to try to meet that. And a question for you, Craig. I really like the focus of this book, Reaching Net Zero, about actually doing what's needed to stop global warming. And you discuss in this book an optimistic future with abundant energy to maintain rising living standards without most of today's air pollution.
Yes, Bill and I early on decided that we were not going to write a doom and gloom book. We felt there was plenty of room for optimism if we could get the word out and get the public to accept the fact that we need to take action soon, really immediately, and that there was a lot of things that could be done. We think that continuing improvements in energy efficiency would be a major help also. And that there's technology that we know about today that Bill and I personally have experienced. It's economical, it's proven, and it can go a long way to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. It's beginning to happen, but we need to make this process move more quickly. The side benefit of it will be it'll decrease measurably global air pollution and improve public health.
Absolutely, that's great. And how would you, also to Craig, how do you respond to the naysayers who are sure the only way to achieve net zero is with a great deal of personal sacrifice and austerity? And also, what's the alternative to reaching net zero?
Well, we believe that fossil fuels are an outmoded solution to our energy needs. You know, several hundred years ago, the world burnt firewood for its energy requirements. And then over 200 years went through a very complex transition to fossil fuels. Complicated and expensive, building pipelines, producing mines, oil refineries, and so on. So we can manage a transition to renewable energy sources, solar and wind. And this will provide power in developing countries that need new energy sources to meet the requirements of their growing populations and the growing demand for energy. There's really no alternative to other than reaching net zero. We need to start eliminating greenhouse gas emissions immediately and continue as long as necessary. You know, what people fail to realize is that there's a huge inventory, 3,000 billion metric tons of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. That's not going away. Even if we stop today, its effects are still going to be felt. It's not going away except for over a very long time period.
Right, it seems like the alternative to net zero is a lot of suffering and austerity. And back to you, Bill. So it's clearly not going to be easy getting to net zero. How do we develop the political will to get there and accelerate the positive changes that are already moving us in that direction?
Well, we believe that there are really two problems that have to be solved. The first is to develop the political will in the US to actually do something about global warming. The second is that we have to get all of the major countries in the world that are major sources of greenhouse gases to cooperate. Without international cooperation, we just can't solve this problem. And it also includes, it's not just the 7 to 10 major industrial countries, it includes other countries such as Brazil. Brazil is the steward of the biggest rainforest in the world, and we need that forest to be preserved as a CO2 sink. In the US, we believe that our politicians are concerned about global warming, but we also don't believe that they will take the actions necessary unless the voting public is behind the actions being taken. So we believe the number one issue is, as far as getting political action, is to educate the public and get them to support changes that are needed to address global warming.
Absolutely. And I've heard it said the annual production of greenhouse gases took a big dip because of the economic effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. Do you think the pandemic is speeding up our collective need to find solutions to our global problems? Or will it slow down our response in favor of addressing basic economic challenges? Can you discuss this both for the US and internationally, Bill?
Well, I think the problem is very similar or the same for the US and internationally. I think the world is obviously preoccupied with the coronavirus and with the economic slowdown that's associated with that. And in that sense, they make it very difficult for us to focus on global warming today. However, a lot of good things are happening. Global warming is becoming a lot more apparent, and I think the public is becoming more aware of the problem. For instance, a good example is the Los Angeles Times in reporting on the California fires. Almost all of the articles refer to the fact that global warming is not the sole cause, but is certainly a major contributor to the forest fire problem we're having today. We're also seeing some very ongoing positive trends, such as in 2019, there was more investment in renewables for and electricity production than in fossil fuels. So there's a move toward greater use of electric vehicles. So there's a lot of positive trends that are continuing in spite of the pandemic. We can also say the pandemic is a good example of a natural force, something that isn't man-made, basically bringing the world economy to its knees. And in some ways, it's an example of what global warming could do to us if we don't deal with this problem at some point. It's another natural phenomenon that is caused by man-made greenhouse gas emissions, and it can only get worse. With the virus, we will have a vaccine and herd immunity, so at some point in the future, you could see us learning to cope with the virus, but with global warming, there is no alternative but to reach net zero. There is no vaccine for global warming.
No vaccine for global warming. Yeah, I get that. Back to you, Craig. Towards the end of your book, you suggest that the federal government educate the people on the imperative of doing something about climate. So how would you suggest the government do that for us?
Well, this situation reminded Bill and I of the 1960s and the controversy about smoking and lung cancer. And there were, of course, arguments even by the tobacco companies that, oh, heck, smoking's good for you. Well, when the Surgeon General's report came out in 1964, linking smoking and lung cancer definitively, that's when things started to change. So we think the federal government, which is equivocated about the problem to date, needs to come out with a definitive statement that, yes, this is a problem, and yes, we're going to do something about it, and we have to do something about it. There's another issue there, though, that was apparent with smoking, and that is the problem of latency. With smoking, when the decline in cigarette consumption started, the decline in lung cancer incidence didn't actually occur until 25 years later. So there was a latent damage that had been built up, and that's the case with global warming today. Also, we won't know the full extent of the damage for decades.
Craig, your book recommends development of a global warming report card. On your website, you include your version of a global warming report card. How should we proceed to get a national and international report card that will help the public track our progress in dealing with global warming?
Well, the report card was actually Bill's idea, and I think it was a good idea. We need to get information out to the general public that is easy to access and that's understandable. People don't want to take the time to read some 40-page long technical report written by a scientist. But everybody understands the concept of a report card. We've all had them from elementary school on up. And we think there's a 10 or 12 main parameters like the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere, the average temperature rise or average sea level rise that are good indicators of what's happening. And we can update those every 6 months or so. They change slowly, they don't change overnight. And we can assign a grade to them. And if global emissions, for example, gets a grade of F, people will understand that.
And it looks like California is in the middle of another record-breaking hot season and a tremendous surge of wildfires. Elsewhere, we seem to be headed towards a record number of hurricanes. Do you think that these developments will start convincing Americans that we need to get serious about reducing greenhouse gas emissions?
Well, let's just look at the record here just real briefly. We had the most wildfires in California in 2018 when they burned over 1.5 million acres. Right now, fires in California have burnt more than twice as much, over 3 million acres, and with a great loss of property and life. And it's not just in California. Here in Oregon, Washington, the whole western states, there are dozens and dozens of fires burning. At the same time, in the southeast, we're headed towards another record-breaking hurricane season. The National Weather Service is predicting 12 hurricanes, 5 of which will be major. One major one has already hit the southeastern United States, caused over $15 billion in damage, and over 116 deaths. Another one is coming as we speak right now. And there are 3 more lined up out in the Atlantic. If you go look at the weather map, it's amazing. So my point at this time is to say, look, how much more evidence do you have to see? What does it take to make people realize that something has changed?
Absolutely. There's a lot changing, and we really need to get serious about that. And your book, Reaching Net Zero, really helps us move in the right direction. Thanks for your time, Bill and Craig. And to close, I've got a cartoon by Graham McKay that tells the situation we've got going.
If you can't read the fine print, it says, "Be sure to wash your hands and all will be well."